Suddenly we find that young people that have been journeyed with and invested in actually can often drop off or fall through the gap overnight, but they're the same kids, they're the same people's children, they are your youth group, but they've just stepped into a different life stage and the church hasn't stepped up to meet it. What would happen if we actually started to see what's being developmentally said is that young adult and adolescent development is actually stretching out into our 20s. What would happen if churches began to see the 20s as part of a unique opportunity for formation of disciples, particularly in our years of deciding who we are and who we are in the world, which is what studies are showing is happening. Our teenage years are being basically stretched longer, but our church response hasn't been to stretch our resource and vision longer in response. The campus is a greenhouse of growing up. Our young people are being formed right now on our campuses. The question is the church part of that formation story or not? Students, we know, go on from college into every sphere of influence in society. So again, that poses a challenge to us as the church. Do we want to be part of the story of formation of people that will go on to lead in government and finance and media and education and our healthcare systems? Because if the college, we can actually identify a ground and a place where people are being formed in the careers and pathways that they will then go on to do, where is the community of God? Where are the people of Jesus in those moments of being formed in lots of other ways? And also, if your church has a vision for international mission and global missions, the campus is where the nations collide together. It is a space for international mission and ministry right on our doorsteps. We have young people that come from all over the globe to study here in the United States. Europe has a huge amount of students that go to study there. Imagine what would happen if local churches were the greatest communities of welcome for people from other nations, and what would change in the world if we sent college students back to home nations, having encountered the love of Jesus and been part of his body, his local church. What would that look like? You can see we've got big vision when it comes to why churches need to be part of this story of reaching students. But when I say students, what does that mean for you? So a quick exercise that you can do, probably not now, but just for you to note down, would be a little bit of simple Googling, to be honest. Where does your church gather? Where do your people live? And where's your local college campus or campuses? Do you know your student neighbours? If we're going to start talking about reaching college students, the first place for a church to start is to actually know something about the people that they're talking about, so that it goes from theory and into practice. Where do your colleges gather for their lectures, for socializing, for parties? Where are the residences where they live? What are students' kind of commutes to work look like? Where are they hanging out? Are they rubbing shoulders already with places and people that your church are already part of? When we want to know about loving our neighbour, when it comes to loving our student neighbour, what are the students in our city like for us? Your community college down the road might be your closest campus. That kind of student will be from a kind of area doing a kind of course that won't be the same as another university 20 minutes away. So it's worth knowing some of the specifics about who we're talking about. What's a normal student look like for you guys? And if you were going to speak to them, if you were going to connect with them, if you were going to in any way serve them, where are some of their greatest needs and how might you as a church begin to respond to that? So yeah, the first thing to say is to think through as a church who we're actually meeting and beginning to get a bit of a cultural perspective on that. Now, lots of churches actually give us plenty of reasons why they don't work with students. So I just want to name a few of the challenges, a few of the things. Maybe you've said this, or maybe your senior church leader or somebody in your community said this. And I just want to, I suppose, debunk a few of these myths. So firstly, we hear college students, they're basically a nightmare to work with. They're unpredictable, they're flaky, they're disorganized, they don't give, and then they leave again. Now, the truth is, that can be true of any generation. What would happen if the church chose to disciple people in their flakiness, in their indecision, in their identity crisis, in their deconstruction moments? What would happen if the church got involved in that mess of young adulthood, rather than when you're cleaner or easier to work with, then you'll be in the family of God? We know we don't really agree with that. I've also seen college students be some of the most generous members of church community. Have anyone actually discipled them around money and generosity and how to use their student loan not only for themselves, but for the benefit of others? Is that even a conversation? Because if they're not giving, have you asked? And imagine if Jesus said, oh, I'm only here for 3 years. I won't bother investing any of my first disciples. Jesus saw the opportunity of 3 years as a time to intentionally invest, raise leaders, and then send out into all the earth. What if student mission, what if reaching college students became a vision for sending rather than we lose them after 3 to 4 years? What if it was a sending moment? What would happen to the global body if that's how we postured ourselves? Some churches say campus ministries are best placed to reach students, so not us. And it's true, there are lots of brilliant campus ministries, but we don't want to outsource discipleship of a generation to other people. We want to play our part as the church in reaching and discipling and being an intergenerational family. So of course, we bless and honor the fact that campus ministries are getting a lot done. But where is our theology of being part of the wider body? From birth until death, we want the local church to be a family that go together. Do we tag out for the 3 or 4 years of college, or is this a moment to step in for the church? It's something to think about, even our theology of mission and discipleship. Do we take holidays from it? And do we think students take holidays from church as well? Vacations. People say they all go to the big church down the road. And some of them do go to a big church that might be down the road for you guys. Loads of them don't. If you think the reason your church doesn't reach students is because they probably go to somewhere else that's better, the truth is some students won't find a place to call home unless they find you. Some of them just don't connect with the big. Some of them don't want to be lost in a crowd of 200. They want to be known in a room full of 12. And so please don't assume the myth that somebody else is doing the student work. Actually, you've got your part to play. And the other thing that happens with campus ministry that kind of can put people off is, people say, actually, it all feels a bit like territorial. People are almost fighting over the same ground, the same students, and we just don't want to be part of it. That can really happen because campus is a definable area and with a definable people group, and people can feel a little bit like protective of it. I'd encourage you're listening because you are local church people. If anyone's going to pioneer unity, it's you. Have you ever thought about praying with other churches and other ministries and other leaders that also have a heart for college students, and starting with prayer, starting with what you can do together, what you can agree on, which is probably the campus needs more of the love of Jesus, and those young people need to know that there's a place to call home. I wonder what it would look like if you went in as unity rather than trying to grab a few Christian students or compete with them, or what would it look like to go in to bless, to serve, and to pray together first? I think the church can lead the way on unity, and don't let that fear of competition put you off from coming in with a different spirit. Okay, so let's say you start to reach students then. How are students going to actually feel at home with your church? How are they going to find community? Why student community? Well, I don't want to just think about Sundays. Quite often it's easiest and most natural for churches to default to, what we already do, which is Sunday meetings or a front-led gathering of some description. That is a way to taste and see the goodness of God, but it's not going to be the primary way that students are known by name, followed up if they don't turn up for a few weeks, and where they really get to wrestle through their discipleship together. As Lauren's already shared, Fusion began through missional small groups, student-led small groups that kept multiplying because of salvations, because students kept inviting students and seeing more students come to know Jesus. So what does small look like for you? In university, students are looking for belonging, and they will find it. Otherwise, they don't really stay. They'll find it in friendship groups. They'll find it in sports teams. They'll find it in the debating society or in their kind of course mates. Universities actually need students to find places of belonging, because basically that completely changes dropout rates if you have a place to call home. Again, my question to us as churches is, are we even giving students an option of finding belonging in the family of faith? Do they even know that they could find a group to belong to who love Jesus and who welcome them at the table? Or do they have to find it elsewhere because we don't really have any community to offer outside of a front-led meeting? It's worth looking at your current church practice to have a look at if, let's say, 4 college students, by some wonderful answer to prayer, rocked up wanting to participate in the life of your church and wanting to really try your church out, where could they connect already that isn't just come on Sunday, see what you think? Now, some of our friends on this call are in house church plant moments, which means church is also small group, intergenerational community, and meals around the table. So some of you guys have a head start in terms of, if you come, you will be known because we're small enough. But there are lots of people, particularly in the States, that already have a fully functioning kind of big gathered process. But what happens midweek that helps a student theologically and relationally know the church is a family to belong to, not a building to go to or a meeting to watch? Here are some pictures. I wonder which ones might look like what your church has to offer already. And do any of these help college students really find community for themselves? Maybe it looks more like content and front-led and sitting in rows in classrooms. Bear in mind, college students are postured to be lectured at quite a lot already. What would it look like for the church to be more relational than their experience of a university lecture? We have lovely, examples of worship and prayer meetings or Bible studies sat round tables. Are they ready for students to be part of? And how do you make sure they get known and followed up if it's a front-led meeting? Then the picture of kind of mentoring and prayer and intergenerational moments. A really classic way to start for some churches around just beginning community would even be adopt a student, right? As in, let's just say you have a handful of people in your church that are open to welcoming any college student that might walk in. If you even had a little database of a few people that said, we would be happy to be sent a couple of students and they can come for lunch with us and we can offer to pray for them or follow them up. You already are creating a moment of community, even if you're not a church that's got all singing, all dancing life groups already. I love the picture of the students stood and sat around a fire. In some ways, that's Fusion's vision for every local church having smaller intentional community for students, is it would be a bit like gathering around a fire. What I love about that photo is there are people on the edges of the fire that even look like they might be sort of messing about or fighting a bit. You've got people standing up. Some, maybe they're coming towards, some, maybe they're leaving. And then in the center, you've got people sat really close to the fire, getting as much heat as possible. We kind of believe in small groups that are a bit like that at the core of them are so Jesus-centered and full of the Holy Spirit. It is warm, it is life, it is energy, and people are becoming more like Christ as they are near his refining fire. It's drawing community in. But there's blurry enough outside edges that mean that people that are a bit messy and on the fringe and don't even know how to be in a small group can actually find some place around the fire where they begin to get drawn into. That's how Fusion small groups multiplied back in the day, was basically they were messy enough that people that didn't know Jesus felt welcomed, and they didn't quite fit the in club, and yet they were welcome in these groups. But the center of them was so potently Jesus, it drew more people in, and more people discovered life because it was unapologetically Jesus at the center. So another question would be, how do students connect with your church and know that they have community outside of Sunday gatherings? Do you have any models or pathways for that? And if not, that is something really to think about, because that makes all the difference to the student senses of belonging. Well done, you're doing well. We're going to keep whistle stopping through. These are core values for you to think about as a church. You might be interested in reaching college students. So I know I'm going fast, but I want you to have those core building blocks in your mind as I give you a taste of this stuff. So what about student discipleship? Now, I met a church leader a couple of years ago in the States, and I've been friends with her since. And I remember her saying this after the kind of the worst of COVID lockdowns and kind of the most intense bits of the pandemic had passed. And she said, Miriam, it feels like with COVID, the tide went out in the church. And as we couldn't gather anymore and we couldn't just keep doing what we'd always done, as the tide went out, we got to actually see what was left washed up on the beach, what was actually going on with our people and our discipleship and the state of our church underneath our gatherings and the big and all the things that we'd kind of just known how to do for years. When the tide went out, what was left washed up on the beach? And in this church leader's case, she said she was quite discouraged by the state of discipleship. I would say that people are experiencing a real mixture of what's happened to their churches and their young people during years of more isolated times and not being able to kind of be in youth groups or student works or connecting to the big. And the truth is, the people that have thrived are people that have worked out their discipleship journey with Jesus and their own life of devotion and their own rhythms of following Christ. And the people that have really struggled are the ones that were kind of relying on their Bible reading coming from someone reading scripture to them at the front once a week, or from being around their friends who could kind of bolster their energy for faith. Now, it's not that we don't want the gathered and the corporate, but it's worth us thinking, how is our church doing around discipleship in general, around being formed more like Jesus in community? And again, do we have a pathway for college students to be part of that? Formation is key to us all. It's what helps the tree root down and grow and bear lasting fruit. And we also know, as I've said before, if the adolescent years have been stretched into our 20s, young people are still being formed. College students are still deciding who they are and how they want to be in the world. Now is the time for intentional discipleship of college students. This window is a transition window of change and an opportunity to really ground people in rhythms that will set them up for their whole adult life. And the other great bit of news is Gen Z want it. They want investment and mentoring and coaching. They want spiritual mums and dads and grandmas and granddads. They want a sense of intergenerational family, and they want those real life conversations. So even if it feels a bit awkward at first, because an 18-year-old doesn't really know how to sit with a 60-year-old, or a 21-year-old hasn't really ever been challenged before their 30-year-old church leader actually challenged them on a few things. The truth is, in discipleship, when iron sharpens iron, we actually begin to get to the nitty-gritty of what it means to follow Christ in practice today. And I actually love that level of investment. And the truth is, my discipleship is sharper from investing in young people too. It goes both ways. So a few ideas to help you think about creating a discipleship culture in your church. Firstly, do you have any spaces where this kind of thing can happen? I'd love to say everything just happens organically in the church, but the truth is organic farming takes incredible intention. You have to really think about what you're putting in the soil. You have to really think about the environment you're creating for things to grow well, what you plant next to each other, things like that, you know? So to say, oh, you know, we just hope discipleship happens naturally, organically, actually involves you really thinking through the environment you're creating. Are you creating spaces for people to connect with people of different generations and life stages? Are you creating spaces for students to get their hands dirty and genuinely serve in helping make what family of God are doing happen? Now, the truth is, I don't want us to see college students as a really easy way to fill all of our jobs in church and our sort of Sunday school rotas that we're getting stuck for volunteers. But they are brilliant to have as volunteers in things like the kids' work or on the sound desk or on hospitality, because not only do they have energy and passion, but they feel more like they're part of the family if they're serving alongside the family. The guy on the sound desk will get to know a couple of older guys, probably, on the sound desk by being there. Students will get to know families and other generations if they're helping in the kids' work. So are there easy ways for students to be coached and supported in serving in your church? But secondly, slightly different to serving, are there genuine spaces for students to participate with you? As in, not just fulfill your vision or fill a rota or help with this volunteer need, but also participate in your normal life alongside you. Join you in the car on a school run, sit around your table for dinner. I don't know, go and play a round of golf with you, or go for a walk, or you need to pick your dog up from the vet, but you've taken a student with you and then taken them for a coffee. What does it look like to actually do life together, to create space in your own life to help some of that natural discipleship of conversations in the car to just happen? And do your people know that that is an option? Like, it doesn't all have to be programmed or in a set room at a set time for discipleship to take place. Secondly, celebrate what you want to replicate. You've probably heard that phrase before, and it's true in all the values that we're talking about today. But celebrating stories will just help discipleship culture become a bit more normal. Stories of, I don't know, like you learning something by meeting up with a 21-year-old. You know, you could share that story, and that will actually seed the idea in people's minds that other generations, like meeting up with college students, might be valuable for you as well as them. I remember in church, this one student, we linked her up with a woman to mentor her a bit. And all they did really was they went on jogs together and the occasional lunch on campus. But this student was so excited to be hanging out with this mum that she told every student how amazing it was and said, oh, you all need to get one. You all need to get a mum like that you can just have a jog with, share a bit about your life with, and pray with over lunch on campus. It was a nightmare, to be honest, because we weren't ready. We didn't have the adults who were up for it or had been asked ready to respond to the wave of students that, because they'd heard this one story, all wanted in on it. They all wanted that kind of connection as well. So celebrating stories, but also being ready with those connections as you begin to celebrate stories of discipleship. And finally, getting that balance right around challenge and support. I think Something that can happen in the church would be that we are so, wanting to keep our young people, or keep them happy, or keep them entertained, or give them everything they need, that we potentially haven't always allowed space to have challenge, to have some more tricky conversations, to talk about the costs of following Jesus, to really wrestle with even theological stuff, and let them ask difficult questions that we don't necessarily know the answers to. What does it look like to introduce ideas of deep accountability and vulnerability with one another, to share life and story and get under the skin of things like that? Fusion have made a couple of decks of cards that help you have honest questions and honest conversations through dealing this deck of cards, and accountability questions and deeper life questions, to help with these conversations that people don't always know where to start. There's a great app that Seedbed, a Methodist kind of movement, have created, called Discipleship Bands. And that app takes you through scripture and deep soul questions based on John Wesley's holiness questions that help you go a bit deeper. Challenge and support, that mixture of I love you, I'm with you, and we're also going to go deeper together, is important. It changes it from just friendship to apprenticeship to Jesus. Let me have a drink. We're moving on. Well done. I hope you're still with me. A couple more parts to go. This one I'm very passionate about, and it is why I believe that we need to go for student evangelism and not just discipleship. In fact, I would even argue you can't separate the two. Disciples make disciples. I don't want us to just be churches that maintain a group. I want us to be churches that mobilize for mission, for people that would never otherwise discover Jesus, or come to a church meeting, or even know that God is real and that he loves them. Luke 10:2 has been a verse that's kind of going to be forever resonating with Fusion, I think. The harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. Ask the Lord of the harvest, therefore, to send out workers into his harvest field. We know that campuses are an incredible opportunity of lots of young people being formed, who many don't know the good news of Jesus, or know that they've got a place to call home with him. We can't just be churches that stay in buildings, and we can't even be churches that just pray excuse me, pray that somebody would come to us. There needs to be a moment of going, of sending, of seeing the very few of us in the body already as workers, but seeing the field as ripe for harvest, with plenty of people of peace and people that are longing for hope and hoping that there is home. That picture is actually of something called a super bloom, which is the effect that happens on a landscape after a wildfire has rushed through it. Where a wildfire causes devastation, ash also creates an incredibly fertile ground. Out of that incredibly fertile ground, wildflowers burst into colour and bloom, and lots of different varieties that couldn't have existed had the fire not come. I sometimes think about a church that becomes on fire with mission a bit like this. If we actually invited the Spirit of God to come, and we said, God, will you send us? Will you make us a body that moves? Will you make us a body that are hands and feet that serve our campus, that serve the city, that go somewhere? Would you make us missionally minded? Would you help us think about the lost ones that don't yet know about home, not just keep busy with what we've already got, who we already know? I think that fire spreads. And I think from that fire, from that prayer, from that heart cry, from that changing to an outwards perspective as a church, flowers spring into life, new lives come to know Jesus that literally you would not have seen had you not changed your mindset into being an outward looking community, thinking about loving the campus, reaching the campus, not just keeping the few students that find you already. Mission can change everything. And if you've ever met a student who has met Jesus for the first time, about anyone who's come to faith radically encountered Christ, it's like wildfire. Like, good news breeds good news. We are reminded about how good news Jesus is when somebody comes to faith, and we suddenly realize, oh yeah, this can happen because he's real and he saves and he transforms lives. And with students, a bit like we saw when Fusion started, it just multiplied because this good news kept spreading, because it was too good not to share, and more wildflowers just blossomed all over the place as students shared Jesus with students, and they became part of this family of God that kept inviting and looking outwards. Evangelism is necessary to bring life, not only to the church, but to a disciple. As I say, a hallmark of being a disciple is that you're apprenticing others into the way of Jesus as well. And that includes discipling people in walking towards faith who don't even know that Jesus is real yet, or certainly haven't been interested in church. And there are plenty of stories of revival from history that actually give us a bit of a sense of the ingredients of revival. And basically, campus is one of the few places still left today that have all the right kind of recipes for a revival, for a move of God that is so significant that many people come to faith in Jesus in close proximity at the same kind of time. Those moments happen when people live, work, do life in community, basically in the same kind of geographical area. And so historically, where revivals have happened, have been in places where those sort of ingredients are present, which is why so many moves of God have burst out of campuses and burst out of student prayer meetings, because students are still one of the few places in this sort of transient global society where young people are living, working, studying, commuting, socializing, all in the same kind of geography. So when they meet Jesus and they're in close proximity in kind of every area of life together, this thing spreads. Some top tips for becoming a church that thinks about evangelism and has a more missional culture. Firstly, it starts with you and me. We don't want to just chat a good game and not actually have told anyone who doesn't know Jesus about him ourselves. So I wonder, who are you telling about Jesus? Who are you in close proximity with in your life who doesn't yet know the good news? What does it look like for you to be loving your neighbour at the moment? Because it's important for all of us. It's critical for Gen Z. It should be kind of critical for all of us that authenticity matters. We don't just want to chat a good game, but actually have no experience being around people that don't follow Jesus ourselves, let alone how to talk to them or share the good news of Jesus in words and actions. So what does it look like for you? Because you will kind of replicate. You breed what you lead. There's another phrase that's probably not mine. It doesn't sound like it's mine. I'll say it's not mine. Secondly, adjustments to language can really help. If you want to be a church that wants to start thinking about people that aren't in your church culture already, changing the way you speak will really help that. For example, one of my favorite things to do when I visit local churches is to look through their social calendar of all the events they've got planned. And then I tell them why all these church social events are mission, not for the church. I was just at a church a few weeks ago that were doing a big fall festival. And there was absolutely no mention of inviting neighbours or friends or colleagues to come to the fall festival, to join in the pony rides, to get pictures with pumpkins and all that stuff that Americans do spectacularly well compared to England. And so I got up and I just said to them, by the way, the fall festival isn't for you. It's not to make the church happier about what the church does. The fall festival is an opportunity for our neighbours and our friends to come and experience something of the community of God's kingdom in a space that's a church, but not for kind of the religious reasons where they may be put off going. But it also breaks down the barrier of thinking, well, I can never go in that building, because you already did, to have a photo with a pumpkin. And now you know where the church is, you know when they gather, and you've met some of their people. So it actually really deconstructs any of that fear around, oh gosh, I couldn't go to that church, it'll all be a bit weird, or whatever the thing is. So changing our language, even around what we do, to be like, who are you inviting? I remember once meeting with a student on campus and I said to her, I'll buy you and your friends coffee after you finish your lecture, because I'd like to meet them too. All I did was extend my language to become an invitation that I saw that student and her community as part of our extended community as the church. Who are you inviting? That kind of language that for her, she then goes, oh, my church leader cares about my friends, not just me. That can change culture just by language. Again, celebrating stories is really important. And I don't just mean glory stories like that one amazing moment where a student stood up in their lecture, gave the gospel unannounced, did an altar call, and the whole lecture hall got saved. No, what I mean is stories of faithfulness to practicing the work of an evangelist. For example, let's say one of your students bravely prays for a teammate on the football field who seems to have hurt his leg, and they just bravely pray that, for healing. And let's say they don't get healed. The story is that they prayed, that they opened the door. They're not in charge of the healing. They're not in charge of saving hearts or healing bodies. The Holy Spirit does that. But did they offer to pray? Did they open up the door of conversation? Did they open up the opportunity for God to do something, to encounter somebody? That's worth celebrating. So stories of invitation, even if the invite's not a yes, that kind of stuff's worth celebrating. I would say, just as a church, thinking through your teaching schedule, teach on evangelism and mission in the first term, in this fall semester now, teach early. If you've not got it in yet, I'd still get it into the plan ahead of Easter. But when you think about next year's rhythms, teach on this stuff theologically early. Don't assume that your college students have already had lots of sermons about mission and evangelism. They might not have had any. But if you want it to be part of your culture, theologically teach it early in your season. And finally, pray. And I don't just mean like pray kind of, oh, we hope we get better at evangelism. I mean, pray specifically for the provision of student evangelists, because they can transform your college work overnight. Secondly, pray for the equipping of evangelists, because they build the body in maturity. Thirdly, pray for people to actually come to know Jesus. Specifically, I'd even give numbers, like really make this a prayer challenge. Prayer Walk Campus, prepare that ground prayerfully for people to meet Christ. And make that part of your agenda, praying for freshmen before they arrive, praying over, I don't know, Halloween parties that have just happened, when it can be a bit of a crazy night for college students. So let's pray, let's get the church thinking missionally, even in our prayers. Final part I just want to briefly mention is investing in students as leaders. You're discipling them, you've welcomed them, they've got community, they're sharing faith. Are we intentionally leading them as student leaders? Are we raising them to be mature disciples? You can see in Matthew 4, Jesus in the calling of his first disciples, who would have been a very similar age and no doubt similar level of messiness to our young adults today. Jesus calls them, but he calls them into a pathway. He calls them forwards into something. He doesn't just say, follow me, but he says, and I will send you. He gives them a vision for their participation in the life of the kingdom. And it doesn't mean just come to my event or just come and follow me without intention and without direction, without saying, and you can do what I'm doing. Jesus also calls them into leadership with a cost. They had to put down some things in order to take up the call of leadership. So just recognizing not everybody is going to have the same level of kind of leadership gifting, but to follow Jesus, to lead others towards him, involves cost and sacrifice, but it also involves vision and intention from those that are doing the calling. I think one of the most important things to say about raising student leaders is that they're not just going to be leaders in your church. Now, I would really recommend raising student leaders to lead themselves and their friends to Jesus in small missional community. I would really recommend raising students to preach and teach and bring voice to your church as genuine participators in the body, not just spectators. But also bear in mind, by investing in leaders, you are investing in character and long-term fruit. You're investing in people that will go on to lead in every sphere of society. So you might be raising a leader, not for the sake of the church, but for the sake of the world. And so just recognizing there is even a kingdom vision for how we raise leaders, that yes, it does involve pipelines within our church because it gives us opportunity to give them opportunity, but also how are you raising that captain of the football team to go on and lead in the, I don't know, accountancy firm that he goes on to, or raising that woman to have integrity on her nights out because she's going to go on and be a doctor where she'll also be invited on big nights out, and how she leads herself and others will shape things. 3 keys to reaching student leaders that are worth thinking about. Firstly, get to know them. Sounds silly, but you basically won't raise people that you don't really know or trust. That also means if you're not the senior leader or in charge of raising leaders in your church, you need to expose leaders to other students so that they've got some more people to draw upon. Part of the way that we only lead kind of people like us is because they're the people we get to know and feel most comfortable with. So if you want student leaders raised, they probably need introductions to people that hold key opportunities and spaces, so then they can be drawn upon and coached. Secondly, we have to create genuine opportunities for responsibility. Again, not just filling a job that you've already told them how to do, but leading in a job where they will carry enough weight that it might break a bit if they dropped it. That's genuine responsibility, when they actually have to, you're not going to actually have cleaned it all up and sorted it all out, but you gave them a practice. At some point, student leaders need to be invested in enough that it might cost you something if it doesn't go that well. That is actually how we grow adults, mature in faith, who are willing to step up and take responsibility and actually feel like they are the church. They don't just go to church, but they are a member of the body. And finally, of course, this means more risk taking, unfortunately, because young adults are still in formation. They're still messy around the edges. There's stuff that they will have never been discipled in before until they met you. But the truth is, it's a much greater risk to not risk it on young adults. It's a much greater risk to step back and just do things for them rather than doing things with them and then releasing them to really have a go with some stuff on their own. We risk way more by not taking young adults seriously and their potential as disciples and leaders, and genuinely trusting them to work it out with you as they go. So there you are. There is an absolute whistle-stop tour. Now, this book, Church and College Students, expands each of the teaching blocks that I've just given you a taste of. It also gives you some resource with practical questions and leadership discussion stuff to go on in your church. So if you want a good next step follow-up tool, grab one of those little orange books and go into these ideas with more detail. Because like I say, all I've done there is try to give you a taste of some of those building blocks to be thinking about if you're going to be a church that reaches students. But I recognize, there's so much more to say and so many more stories to tell than I have had time for. So I'll take a few questions if there are any to help us really kind of put shoes on this in your context. But please know there is more follow-up to come with Fusion and our resources if that would help you.
Thank you, Miriam. That was definitely a whistle-stop tour for sure. So feel free to put your questions in the Q&A or in the chat, and we'll share. One quick question: where can we find that book? We'll post the link in the chat and share a bit more in just a few, but you can find it on our website. One question did come in. If our church is located near a college campus, but we don't have a relationship with the campus or any college students at all yet, what are some ways to get started?
Great. Really good question. I'd say a twofold approach. Firstly, if it's not a private university where it's not legal, then I would prayer walk it just so that you have a little sense of who's there and where the life is. And, you know, like one of our local campuses, the library was the place that had the most life about it. So it's like good to just know, like, what is this about? Do I even get a feel of the lay of the land? Secondly, it can really help to reach out to if there is a chaplain on campus or somebody that would have some pulse on what's currently going on faith community-wise on the campus. Chaplains are sometimes amazing at being door holders, and other times they're not really looking to have more people around. So it's just worth finding out what kind of chaplain you've got and whether there's anything you can pray for them. And thirdly, I would reach out to maybe the student counselling service or a faculty member or even like somebody near the top and just say, hey, we're local, you're local. We're the local church. We're just praying for you. You're our neighbours, and we're aware that there's often not a lot of connection between local people and our college students. Are there any ways that you can think where we could bridge that gap? Like, you could actually just ask the university if there's any ways to serve. And you never know what people of peace might be behind the keyboard who respond, but it's worth at least sounding out some of those things.
Thanks, Miriam. There's a couple kind of similar themed questions. I think Emily's question about church not having capacity to work like with Fusion. There was another question about not wanting to undermine leadership, but like really like if people have a heart for student mission and evangelism, discipleship, but not wanting to undermine leadership. Any tips on how to navigate that in a church culture?
Yeah, and I mean, it is always a bit sad, isn't it, when it feels a bit funny, like a member of the body of Christ coming to say, I'd love that our church could reach young adults so they could be part of this family. Ideally shouldn't undermine any leader. It should only encourage them that their people are healthy and that their church is worth the time and energy, of course. Like, I mean, I would try and get a meeting with your senior leader, just firstly to, and I'd be praying for them before you meet with them, particularly if you feel like there might be a bit of a tension. Firstly to say, with Fusion's model, for example, we don't do Fusion groups, we don't do Fusion events, we don't do Fusion programs that we then tell a church how to run it. We literally are like gasoline in a car engine. We put fuel and equipping in the car that is the church for it to run, particularly around college students, which means for your church leader, you're not asking them, which, bless them, they don't want another job to do. What you're basically saying is, can I meet with you? I'd love to talk to you about my heart for young adults and college students. And I just wonder, does that fit with your heart for the church and our intergenerational kind of family? What might we be more intentional about? What can I do to help? You know, you're not trying to put it on their plate, but it starts with relationship, and the highest form of communication that you can get with them, which ideally would be face to face, but if not, a Zoom or something that allows you to talk to them personally about your heart and wanting to serve because you see potential. And again, same with that question around for other campus leaders. It's up to you totally, but I think there is something quite lovely. If you're a church that's already working on the campuses, I think it's quite good unity to just know the names of the other campus leaders and to pray with them or get a coffee with them once a year or once a semester. You might disagree on lots of things, or you just might have very different models. But if in doubt, again, I'd say go for assuming they're good people trying to do good things. Let's buy them a coffee and reach out and find out how they're doing. Yeah, if in doubt, go for unity. I'd say go for friendship, even though you're going to get on with what your church is doing, which is different to them. Okay, now we've also got, a good question around campus groups and undermining them with your, this is the tricky thing around models. So Robin asked the question around Wesley Foundation already do small groups. Will I undermine them if I do something similar? Again, if we change our mentality from the church trying to reach the same group of predominantly already Christian students, then if we change our mentality from we're trying to reach the same students and now we're competing into, instead of trying to reach this little pool, we're going for the deep blue ocean of students that have never heard about Jesus, then I think there's always room for more expressions of invitation and community for the church. But again, do it in relationship. If you're going to start something that looks quite similar, tell them. And if you can not clash, don't clash, give students more opportunities. I would also say students have a tendency, Christian students, of when they find Christian things they like, they fill their schedules with loads of Christian things. One of our challenges as churches in discipleship is not burning students out on Christian activities every night of the week. So if you have any students in your care, actually challenging them how they're hanging out with people that don't know Jesus and being good friends and good teammates, not just overdosing on sort of 3 different campus ministries and church, that is unhealthy for discipleship. And so actually thinking about not competing, but also helping students not compete their time between different ministries. They shouldn't really be in multiple ones. And so, yeah, thinking about that will help, I think. I've got questions coming in on both sides now. I don't actually know where Lauren's gone. What suggestions for a church to cast vision to young families and older adults about adopt a student? Honestly, Aaron, partly adopt a student is a bit of an admin task, because if you can get people to sign up and say yes to doing having 2 or more, or they can number it, but I would always have more than 1 student around your house at a time, because students need to not go alone. They don't feel super safe, and that's probably wise. Get families to sign up for, will you once a month add 2 students to your Sunday lunch? I would start somewhere like that just allows, now they might then, once they've met those students, invite them back, but it allows this sort of low touch, just pathway for very doable intergenerational family to happen without you having loads of administration for it. Because basically you get your list, when new students, you connect with them, they say, oh, if you come to church, we actually do student lunches afterwards in homes. So you can bring a mate and you both get fed. Oh, that family's got really sweet kids, blah, blah, blah. Or those guys actually have a dog, so they'll go for a walk if you want to go up, you know what I mean? So you just introduce them to family like that. A big time to do adopt a student would be before the freshmen arrive. So in terms of thinking ahead to next year, we will talk about this in future webinars when we think about preparing for freshmen. But you really want people signed up for adopt a student before the summer, ready for that August push, because if you do get a big invitation moment, you want follow-up to be shared, because it can't all be on you. And so, yeah, I would also, if you can, share some stories of, I'd video some stories, like film, of students saying the difference it made to meet somebody in the church, or to feel like they were known or invited, or their name was known. Testimony builds faith, but it also just helps people see, oh, students are actually quite normal, like I can have them around my table, and that's easy enough for me to just add one more. Adopt a student also means they can send them like a Christmas card. If they're an international student, we've had families in the past that have had international students round for Christmas, and literally like Lauren's Wi-Fi just died. Yeah, literally adopted people at Christmas time because they couldn't go home because their family were in China. And in fact, weirdly, one of my old church leaders probably saw somebody come to faith every year through sharing the Christmas table with Chinese students. And they were baptized before they went back to China. So something to think about. Great. Any more questions, either in the chat or in the questions here before we finish up? And Emily, we can follow up with you personally because I know you're local to Lauren, around what you can do if your church just isn't keen on reaching students, because I know that's super, super tricky. Let me see if I can get why church and students. Okay, so until Lauren comes back, you guys we will be emailing out the discount code that you get with this webinar on our suite of resources. We have just, here's a link, we have just launched our top 5 resources in the USA that have sold out best in the UK to equip the church for mission. The book, church and college students, that I've spoken from and given you a taster of today, is in that resource list. You get a 20% discount code that we will email out to you afterwards for your registration on this, because Lauren's disappeared. So please click on that link to get that. Other resources that actually feed into what I just spoke about are the 2 decks of cards that offer discipleship conversations for accountability and deeper mentoring, and opening up deeper conversation even with people that don't know Jesus. These are actual playing cards, but they also provide discipleship conversation moments. Small Groups Big Mission is our training manual for creating missional small groups. And we run training for this as well, but this is like a workbook. So students are going to scribble all over it as you raise leaders to lead their friends to Jesus. And preparation for college, I didn't even mention. We will talk about this more in the new year. This helps your youth and high school graduates prepare for college. We want them to be prepared so that we receive freshmen that are ready to go as missionaries, rather than people that drop off in that transition gap without a thought. Thanks, Shook, for the endorsement on the chat. Lauren, is there anything else? Can you get the presentation screen back to give them the discount code before we finish out?
Yeah.
There it is. Great.
Beautiful. So there is a discount for everyone who attended today's webinar using the code Fusion Webinar. You'll get 10% off at FusionUSA/resources. That will actually apply to all 5 of those resources that Miriam just spoke about. And then our next webinar will be in 2 weeks on Wednesday, November 16th. It's on discipling college students, tools and tips for building formational friendships with the next generation. And just for attending today's webinar, you can also use promo code FusionUSA for 20% off. And we'll email all that information out, but hope to see you at our next webinar.
Whilst it's still loading, sorry, Wi-Fi, nothing you can do. Thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in. And yeah, feel free to, you get the recording as well, don't they, afterwards, Lauren?
Yes.
Perfect. So feel free, that's for your use only and your teams, obviously. Feel free to rewatch the recording and try and translate some of my incredibly fast English accent talk. It's my fault for trying to do this in an hour. Thanks so much, guys.
Thanks, everyone.
See you in a couple of weeks for deeper discipleship chats.